Hello, welcome to live.code.uk. This is episode 16 where we're looking at functions. We're working through season 2, which is all about the basics of Python. So last week we looked at exception handling, dealing with runtime errors so that we can cope without crashing our program. And we're building on that this week so that we can write our own function that kind of replaces input in Python. So normally, if you want to type in a number to Python and you want to convert it into an integer, if you type in something that's not an integer, it fails and it crashes. So our function that we're going to create today will keep on asking until you type in something that is an integer. So if you type in something that's not a whole number or that's not a number at all, it'll just keep asking you until you type in something sensible, and then that value that you type in is sent back, returned, so that you can store it and use it in the rest of your program. So this is live coding, so the idea is that you can see the mistakes and the thought processes behind the whole code as we put it together. So far, right at the start of season 2, we looked at built-in functions to be able to ask a question, like please enter a number. And then we looked at how to store the result of that. So we're used to the idea of using a function. We say number equals, so that you can type something in and then use it. The problem is, let's say for I in range number, print hello, and then it's going to hopefully say hello 10 times. Doesn't really work because we're expecting a number. We've typed in a number, but input always returns a string. So if we want a number, we have to use another built-in function, int, to convert what we've typed in into an integer so that we can treat it as a number. So that works. The problem is, if we type in something that's not a number, it's going to crash, and we get this runtime error. So that's what we're going to try and overcome today. Rather than using input, I would like to be able to say enter a number, and then it will keep asking us to enter that number until we do something sensible. The problem is Python doesn't know how to enter a number at the moment, so we haven't told it how to. So that's when we can define our own functions. So def means define. We'll define how to enter a number, and then every line ending in a colon in Python, next line expects to be indented, and that means that these lines of code are part of the definition for this function. What is a function? Well, it's like a procedure in that it has a name and it does something useful that we can reuse as many times as we like when we call it. The only difference between a procedure and a function is a function returns a value. So what are we going to return? Well, we're going to return a number. We don't know what that number is yet, so let's set it to something. Let's say that it's going to be the integer version of what we ask the user for. Sorry, typing in an American keyboard layout. Please enter a number. So that kind of works, but we've still got the same problem where it crashes if we don't type in something that we're expecting. Now we can't customize, well we can I suppose, we can overwrite how input works in Python, but it's a bad idea. It's much better to customize our own custom function. So we can say if this fails, so we did this last week, we looked at exception handling. If my line 3 fails, then don't give up, just handle the exception, handle the problem by saying please try again. So that's kind of logically right, but if it crashes, now we don't know what number is anymore, because number is only defined if my line 3 works successfully. If line 3 doesn't work successfully, we get a runtime error, which means we can't do line 3 and we do line 5 instead. So number's not defined, it doesn't know what the number is. So what we could do instead is say number equals 0. So at least if it fails, it will return that number. So I don't know, let's say 10. If I put in something unsensible, it still returns 10. But what would be much better is if it keeps asking us to enter a number until we type in something sensible. So let's see, let's try while true, so it's going to keep going forever and ever and ever. And then if we get a number that we're happy with, we can return that number. We don't need to have a return down at the end now, because this is going to keep on repeating until we get a value that we're happy with. So we get something that's not a valid number, we type in something that's not a valid integer, and it will keep going until we type in something sensible. That value is returned, which means it's passed out from this function when we call that function, and the return value is saved in number so that we can use it in our for loop down here. So let's just change this a little bit so we can talk through the challenges that we've got. So first of all, call enter number again and save the return value into a second variable, just proving the point that you can call a function as many times as you like. The whole point of a function is that you can reuse it. It gives a name to a section of code, so it makes your code a bit more easy to understand. What's the next one? Change the function so it returns a float instead of an integer. So that's going to be changing this function here to float instead. And change the function so it only returns if the user enters a value over 0. Now you could customize this so that it only allows between a minimum and a maximum value. Next week we'll talk about parameters, which is what these values are here. Or you could just only return it if the number is greater than 0. But you need to work through that by yourself. Okay, so I hope this is helpful. Next week we'll put all the pieces together to talk about procedures, functions, return values, and parameters. But hopefully you've seen how helpful and useful defining your own functions can be.